In the course of naval history, man has created ways to destroy his enemy, from rams to cannons. Slowly, as technology advanced, survivability became increasingly important and a realistic aspect as ships started to be made out of iron and then steel. Ships in the 20th century were able to survive some truly insane damage, with ships like HMS Warspite surviving shells at Jutland, guided bombs in the Mediterranean, and mines. Other ships like SMS Seydlitz survived explosions, shell hits, flooding, and other manner of damage. These ships just scratch the surface of ships surviving damage they really shouldn't. And in today's video, we'll cover some ships that shouldn't have survived. First up, we have the grand old lady, HMS Warspite, fighting and surviving 2 world wars, where I think her most interesting and shocking damage came at the hands of German guided bombs in the Mediterranean during the Second World War. On the 14th of September 1943, Warspite proceeded to Salerno, an Italian city just south of the major port city of Naples. She was joined by her sister Valiant and a destroyer flotilla to support the army landings by bombarding the beaches. After steaming at 23 knots throughout the night, Salerno Bay was reached the next day, and enemy positions were attacked during the evening of the 15th despite air attacks. Warspite's anti-aircraft guns were in almost constant action for a night and a day. Her particular targets with the big guns were German artillery, tanks, and troop formations in the hills beyond the beachhead. The next morning, the 16th, after daybreak, Warspite was to proceed to an area of operation of the previous day. However, at 2:10 p.m., after one shoot, she steamed past the southern swept channel to take part in a further bombardment at position Avalanche North. That is to say, a more northerly point of the invasion. Just 15 minutes later, Warspite was attacked by 12 Focke-Wulf 190s, which dived on the ship out of the sun. All the while, bombs were spotted 6,000 to 8,000 yards on the port beam, with the parent aircraft Dornier 217s were above the ship at 20,000 yards. When the aircraft and bombs were over the ship, the bombs took a sharp turn and dived at a great speed. At the time of the attack, Warspite was cruising at a leisurely 10-knot speed, approximately in 177 fathoms of water. Avoiding action in such a congested area was all but impossible. In that same vein, it would have been ineffective since the time from sighting the bombs to them hitting Warspite was only 10 seconds, where one hit Warspite and after penetrating various decks, burst in the reserve feed tank below the number 4 boiler room. The other two were near misses on the starboard side, one abreast the bulge amidships, causing considerable damage, and the other causing little damage. To quote Petty Officer Banks in Warspite, Warships of the Royal Navy, "I had been tracking it for a few moments. It looked like a Heinkel bomber. They were Dornier 217s. It was too high for our high-angle guns, and we decided to leave it to our fighter cover, unaware they had been diverted to carry out strafing in support of troops ashore. It seemed the planes might ignore us anyway, but then suddenly I noticed what looked like a smaller plane flying directly beneath the bomber. When they were both directly overhead, the smaller one tipped up, flame shot out its tail, and plummeted straight down." Where to quote from Dr. Norman Friedman in his book The British Battleship, 1906 to 1946, "The bomb that hit Warspite hit on the boat deck just abaft the funnel, passed through several decks, and exploded in the double bottom, holing out the outer bottom for a length of 20 feet and wrecking number 4 boiler room. The other exploded underwater near the bottom of the bilge keel near the number 5 boiler room, flooding numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 boiler rooms, the double bottom air spaces, and other spaces. Slow flooding in both engine rooms and in the number 1 boiler room, 2 generator rooms, shaft passages, and various other machinery spaces was controlled. All boilers were damaged by shock and flooding, but the main turbines were not damaged. Electric power failed. The ship was immobilized. Warspite wasn't quite immobilized yet, as we shall soon see. When she was, she began to drift into an unswept area, and slowly 5,000 tons of water began to come aboard the elderly battleship. The captain of Warspite, Captain Packer, in his report says about the impact and the subsequent events, "I was not thrown off my feet, but for a fraction of a second, I had a kind of blackout, like when you take a hard toss at football or off a horse. I could see and think perfectly clearly all the time. Black smoke and dirt from the funnel and a hell of a noise. I thought the whole mast was coming down as it rocked and bent and whipped. I must say that for a moment, I thought we were probably sunk and quite prepared for the ship to break in two." The anti-aircraft guns were still in working order and continued to blast away at the German aircraft. The Germans were soon out of range of her and her escort's guns. Thus, after the bomb hit, there was what Captain Packer describes as a calm after the storm. However, Warspite was in a precarious position as she was near Salerno and liable to further air attack at any moment, to which the cruiser Delhi reported German transmissions about possible German strikes. Even though I mentioned the damage already from the bridge, Packer began to think things were all right in the immediate aftermath, writing, "I began to think that we had not been hit after all, only near misses. A fire was reported in the hangar. Put it out, I ordered. Then to the guns, for more effect than anything, we will carry out our final bombardment after all." I set course up the channel, and reports began to come in, all calm and accurate. 4 boiler rooms out of 6 flooded, steam for slow speed on starboard engines only. We kept going at 6 knots, then the ship would not steer. We were in the swept channel and steered around in a circle. I stopped engines. We were headed straight into the mines. A minesweeper sent violent signals to get out of it. I could not, for the helm was hard over, and finally the starboard engine room died out too. So we were once again going round in circles, with our carrying us, and quite helpless. Packer got further reports about steam joints bursting, then that the engine room was untenable, and that the 5th boiler room had flooded, leaving Warspite with only one operational. The construction captain gave a damage report that the ship was floating on the main deck, which in the quarter-deck mess deck was showing signs of collapse upwards. The crew began damage control efforts with counter-flooding and pumps, beginning to work to lessen the amount of water on board. Warspite's situation was getting better throughout the afternoon, and with the weather being favorable, it was beginning to seem that Packer and his crew could somehow get the battleship back to Malta. This hope was only bolstered at 5 p.m. when Warspite was taken under tow by 2 American salvage tugs. HMS Delhi would be the RDF ship, along with destroyers to escort her. While being a sitting duck, she was not attacked by German bombers, certainly a shock to the crew, and slowly but surely, at 4-knot speed, Warspite was in the process of being towed back to Malta, requiring more tugs as time went on. By midnight, she was entering the Straits of Messina. Taking from another sailor here, where he writes, "Inside the Warspite, there was an eerie silence. Warships never sleep, their vital systems providing a background noise to which crews become accustomed. Now, with all her machinery deprived of power, she was completely silent, and it was more unnerving. When night came, battery-powered lights flickered. With no possibility of preparing a hot meal, lemonade, bully beef, and ship's biscuits were passed out to her sailors. In the Straits, Warspite encountered some trouble. In Packer's war diary, he writes, "When we struck the tide rips and whirlpools, the ship became unmanageable. From midnight until about 5 a.m., we were completely out of control and going through the Straits broadside on, with all our tows parted except one. However, just as the tide turned off Reggio to take us back up to the Straits again, I got a tug alongside each side aft and straightened her up sufficiently for the tugs to go ahead and get some way on the ship. Despite being a superb sitting target throughout the 17th and 18th of September, as she slowly crawled towards Malta, no enemy aircraft or submarines came across Warspite. She reached the harbor on the 19th, and to a great crowd of cheering onlookers. The grand old lady had made it back to port in one piece, although weighing considerably more with the water she had taken on. She was down 6 crewmen, as they had perished because of the attack, and a further 20 were injured. The casualty list does vary, as I've seen 9 dead and 14 wounded as well. When Warspite arrived, she did so with 5,000 tons of water on board and a noticeable list of 4.5 degrees. The flooding had been curtailed by the pumps on board. At Malta, they didn't have the facilities to repair the damage done to the battleship, given the extent of it. They could patch her up sufficiently to get her to Gibraltar in November of 1943, being put in dry dock at Gibraltar 4 days after arriving, where a petty officer got down to go look in the dry dock to look at the damage done to the grand old lady, writing after the fact, "How the Warspite stayed afloat, I will never know, for without exaggerating one bit, you could have driven a double-decker bus through the hole put in the ship's bottom." This was repaired by a large caisson. Warspite had already been earmarked for the Normandy bombardment force, so there was no time for extensive repairs. When sailing for the United Kingdom in March of 1944, two of her 15-inch gun turrets were out of action due to the damage she suffered from the bombs. Boiler Room 4 was also still out of action when she reached Rosyth. There, only one of the 15-inch turrets was repaired, meaning that X turret was out of action and would remain so. Warspite went on to participate in further bombardment missions, and later, in mid-June 1944, she struck a mine, causing more damage to the ship, which would be a fun subject for another video. To close out this section, we'll go over a description of the damage as seen in R.A. Burt's British Battleships 1919 to 1945. The bomb that hit the ship had approached at 20 degrees to the vertical and 15 degrees to the centerline plane. It struck the boat deck, passed through the port hangar, wardroom, galley stores, after mess deck, kit locker flat, and number 4 boiler room before bursting in a double bottom reserve feed tank. The hole in the boat deck was roughly 5 feet, 6 inches squared, and centered about 11 feet from the center line to port, extending from 128 to 130 stations. The forecastle, upper, and main decks were holed on the port side. Stations 126 to 128, 18 to 19 feet from the center line respectively. The middle deck was holed. The outer deck was holed over A, B, and C strakes. The port side between 123 and 133 stations, the aperture being 20 feet long by 7 to 14 feet wide. The inner bottom was blown upwards over the same area. The main transverse bulkhead, 100 to 154, both leaked. The main transverse bulkhead, 136, was holed. Other bulkheads were badly damaged in the area of the blast. The near miss hit close in the water to the ship's side and burst near the bottom of the bulge at station 140, starboard side. The bulge plating was ruptured and bulged between 111 and 159 stations. Splits and seams were evident. The outer and inner battery platform was corrugated over the area of the number 5 boiler room, and both were holed. The bilge had been fractured. The compartments of the middle deck from 118 to 154 stations were flooded. Next up, we have SMS Seydlitz, and of course, when you think of her surviving damage, you think of Jutland and probably this photo. Although surviving this damage is impressive, I think her survival at Dogger Bank is right up there, and most haven't heard about it. We'll pick up the story right when Seydlitz was hit, and in the most critical point for Seydlitz in the battle. It was at 10:43 a.m. As the ships of the first scouting group were headed back to Germany, a shell fired from line struck the barbette of D turret. Robert K. Massey has this to say in his book, Castles of Steel, Britain, Germany, and the Winning of the Great War at Sea. The powder charges being brought up were ignited by the explosion, and flash fire shot upward into the turret, setting fire to the charges being delivered to the gun, and downward into the magazine. The magazine crew, seared by flames, tried to flee forward by opening the steel doors leading to the compartments of the adjacent turret. As a result, the fire spread forward, setting alight the charges there, spreading to the adjacent magazine and upward to C turret. Seydlitz now faced the danger of a final, annihilating explosion that would detonate all magazines and cause the ship to disintegrate. 3 men saved her: Lieutenant Commander Hegedam, Chief Artificier Hang, and gunner's mate Müller. Making their way through the searing heat to the valves for flooding the magazines, they spun the handles and drowned the threat of explosion by permitting 600 tons of seawater to flow into the magazines. Remarkably, although 165 men had been killed and 2 of her 5 turrets destroyed, Seydlitz not only survived, but continued in action and maintained her speed. It was an extraordinary demonstration of the excellence of German warship design and the extensive watertight subdivision of her hull. Taking from German battlecruisers of World War I, their design, construction, and operations by Gary Staff, he writes, "Then, suddenly, at 10:43, she received a hit with fatal consequences. A shell fired from line struck the barbette of D turret. The 13.5-inch shell passed through the battery deck and struck the 230mm thick D turret barbette, where it detonated. A red-hot piece of barbette armor was broken off and was thrown into the working chamber, where it set fire to the main and 4 charges there. No enemy shell parts were found in the working chamber. Flash flames shot upwards into the turret and downwards through the elevator shafts, setting fire to the cartridges in the turret, on the handling room turntable, and the elevator room. Only the cartridge containers with their lids still on did not burn. With the first penetration of the flash flames and poisonous gases from burning cartridge cases, the crew of the handling room of D turret sought to save themselves by exiting their room and escaping into the corresponding room of C turret. To do this, they had to pass through double doors, the first of which opened aft and the second forwards. Investigation later showed that the second door was carried away, as though by the pressure of gases. With the opening of these doors, flash flames passed into the cartridge hoist room, handling room of the C turret, and the deadly events were repeated. In just a few seconds, 6,000 kilograms of powder burnt, totally burning out turrets C and D and sending flames mast high. 62 powder charges, including those in the munitions chamber, had completely burnt. In the 2 turrets, a total of 165 men eventually lost their lives. The medical report read, "One part of the turret's crew were burned by the flash flame, for the greater part of the corpses were in the position in which death had surprised them. Individual corpses were completely burned. Another part of the turret crew had succumbed to gas inhalation. 5 were wounded with burns, 3 from turret C and 2 from turret D, and 1 could be saved. One of them, a sailor, had first and second degree burns to his entire body and succumbed to his injuries on the same afternoon on board. Of the remaining 4, 2, a stoker and a sailor, had first and second degree burns on their whole bodies. The other 2 were a machinist's mate with first and second degree burns to both hands, and a sailor with light burns to the face and body. The sailor, Matrose Ernst König, was a loading number of the left barrel of turret Caesar, turret C. He wrote, "Now we loading numbers went at it, beginning with the shell. Push, jerk. It went into the barrel under our exertions. The cartridge followed, the same. 4 gasps, a jerk. Breech lock closed tight." He continued, "Suddenly, there was a crash, almost like a concussion. What was that? We looked at each other for a fraction of a second. We listened. That was no concussion. There was a hissing near us. In the next moment, a great flash of flame climbed high into the middle of the turret. The turret leader and order transmitter were enveloped by the glowing flames at the same moment. Then a second, still larger flash struck up under me directly from the entry hole to the reloading chamber, working chamber, and hit me in the face. I fell backwards. The entire turret was engulfed in bright flames at that same moment. An invisible force pushed me. Luckily, I was propelled to where the entry hole was. I allowed myself to fall out." The first artillery officer, Korvettenkapitän Foster, later wrote, "On this occasion, turrets C and D did not respond. It became clear that they were dealing with a powder fire in these turrets and their munition chambers or magazines. Therefore, I first gave the command to flood compartment 3, which was the compartment where both these turrets and their magazines were located, thus flooding the lower part of the ship. I looked aft towards turrets C and D. It was an electrifying sight. The aft part of the ship was enveloped in a blue-red flash flame that reached to the height of the mast tops. The munition chambers of both turrets were therefore enveloped in flame, and it could only be seconds before the entire ship would be engulfed and explode. It only remained for us to shoot as quickly as possible to perhaps achieve something in the last moments, so I gave the command for a rapid fire, and either a heavy or medium salvo was discharged from the guns every 10 seconds. In the leak central or damage control center, news of the catastrophic hit reached the first officer, Korvettenkapitän Hegedon. Together with the Poonmeister Wilhelm Heidkamp and Feuerwerker Müller, he went aft to compartment 3, where the flooding valves for the aft turret group magazines were located. Hohenmeister Heidkamp was first to enter compartment 3. The heat was intense, and the smoke and poison gases were choking, so his uniform, hair, and eyebrows were singed. The blinding gases made finding the valves almost impossible because flashlights could not penetrate the thick smoke, but Hohenmeister Heidkamp knew their location from memory as he had been assigned to the Blumenthal shipyard during construction of the Panzerkreuzer. When he had finally reached the valves, he found that they were glowing red hot, but selflessly, he grasped the first valve's steel operating wheel and turned it. Then he went to work on the second wheel before he had to be replaced by Feuerwerker Müller, who completed the task. Hohenmeister Heidkamp suffered bad burns to his hands right to the bone, and his lungs were injured by the hot, poisonous gases. Nevertheless, the aft magazine chambers were flooded, and the ship was saved from probable destruction. The Battle of Dogger Bank continued, and Seydlitz received one further heavy-caliber hit, which struck amidships but did not penetrate the armor belt. At 10:32, remember this is now Greenwich Mean Time like in the beginning of the video, the upper rudder room was again occupied, and at 10:50, the lower rudder room. In the meantime, Lyon had turned away due to Beatty spotting what he had thought was a U-boat, even though there was none in the area, leading to a confusing situation as Lyon became more damaged as well, where the British ships focused on the crippled Blucher, allowing the German ships to retreat and head back to Germany. Seydlitz made it back to Wilhelmshaven, where she went into the Imperial Dockyard for repairs, remaining there until April 1st, 1915. The Battle of Dogger Bank revealed the vulnerability of ships to shells fired at long range in a high arcing trajectory before plunging down steeply on enemy decks that had been unknown before the battle. The Germans learned a vital lesson from the battle. The near-fatal damage to the flagship of the 1st Scouting Group caused changes in the fleet. Understanding the flashlight qualities of an explosive fire and the realization that a fire in the turret system must not be allowed to penetrate the magazine. In a report from Captain von Egede, he writes, "Afterwards, a thorough examination showed everything had been done in accordance with regulations. I told the gunnery officer, if we lose 190 men and almost the whole ship in accordance with regulations, then they are somehow wrong. So we made technical improvements and changed our training methods as well as the regulations." Almost losing a ship is bad enough, but it being the flagship of the scouting groups makes things even more complicated. With Admiral Franz von Hipper on board, yes, I understand he got his title at Jutland, losing a critical figure like that would be really unthinkable. Something that was emphasized by my friend Anchored Past. Go check out his channel and his video on Dogger Bank, link in the description. Commander-in-Chief of the High Seas Fleet, Friedrich von Ingenol, had several conclusions concerning the near-fatal hit. The detonation effect of the shell was mainly against the rooms outside the barbette and on the fishing deck. Only stray pieces of armor and flash flames seemed to have penetrated into the barbette. Shell parts were not found in the working chamber. In the working chamber, the 4 charges and main charges present were ignited by shot, either through the flash of the shell detonation or by the hot fragments of the barbette armor. The flame struck upwards into the turret and below into the munition room and ignited the powder in both. Obviously, with the first burst of flames, the men in the munitions room fled forward to the cartridge loading room of turret C, and of the double doors that led there. The first opened aft, and the second opened forwards. The second was carried away as though from gas pressure, and in this manner flashed into the surrounding rooms and up towards the guns. Of the 4 charges, all those out of their packing tins had been burnt, as had those in their tins that were open. Of the main charges, only those outside their tins burnt, although the heat in the chamber was so intense that in some cases the zinc of the tins had melted in places. No armor-piercing shells detonated. The following conclusions were reached. The munition in the working chamber represented a danger to the turret, and this should be changed, as intended with the 38cm guns. The shells and cartridge hoist elevators must be equipped with doors that automatically close themselves with the passing of the hoist. The 4 charges must be protected against flash until they are up in the gun. The main charges must be protected by a cover. The cover will only be removed prior to loading. New ships must be equipped with separate munition rooms for each turret. The doors between the ammunition rooms for the adjacent turrets of the ship when in service must be locked with padlocks to prevent premature opening. The key locks must be with the turret officer during battle. The order to open may only be given when all the munitions from the turret is fired. The cartridge tin covers may only be removed when the cartridge is required. The present type of fastener, screw clasps, was presumably loosened before the beginning of the battle. In the future, an improved type of fastener is required, the bayonet clasp. The ready cartridges in the heavy turrets must be prevented from piling up. Armor-piercing shells have proved to be neutral in the existing cases of fire. High explosive shells are in question after the experience of SMS Goeben. Therefore, high explosive cannot be recommended for the ready munition of the heavy artillery. No more 4 charges than main charge cartridges. Another quote from von Ingenol is as follows: "The working chamber is a danger to the entire turret. In all new construction, it must be eliminated. Shell and cordite hoists must be equipped with doors that close automatically after the charges have passed. The charges must be delivered to the guns in flame-proof covering. The doors connecting the magazines to adjacent turrets must be secured with padlocks to prevent premature opening. The key must be in the custody of the turret officer, and the order to open only given when all the turret's ammunition has been fired." The German Navy worked quickly to install elaborate anti-flash shutters between the turrets and magazines in all battleships and battlecruisers, along with preventing the risk of fires by limiting the amount of powder and other combustible agents in the turret handling rooms. I think an interesting conclusion to this video is actually from the Battle of Jutland. As Seydlitz was hit by Queen Mary, her gunnery officer wrote, "Then, approximately 10 minutes after opening fire, Hubbard reported to me by telephone, 'Turret Caesar does not give any answer. From the speaking tube of Turret Caesar, smoke is penetrating the artillery central.' This was exactly the same report I received on January 24th on the Dogger Bank, also at the battle's beginning. I therefore knew what this report signified. The cartridges were in flames, and the turret was put out of action. Almost mechanically, I gave the order, 'Flood magazine of turret C.' This would put the chamber underwater and prevent further damage." As found in Gary Staff's Skagerrak, The Battle of Jutland Through German Eyes, while von Egede writes, "Therefore, we made technical improvements and changed our methods of training as well as the regulations. This time, only 1 cartridge caught fire, and the flash did not reach the magazines, and so we only lost 20 dead or severely burned, and only 1 turret was put out of action." I find it extremely interesting that Seydlitz not only survived both engagements, but the new equipment and regulations were used to such effect at Jutland. This really just scratches the surface of damaged ships that should not have survived, and we can really dig into this more with different ships. One ship that I left off this list because the script became increasingly long with these two is the Panzerschiff Deutschland/Lützow, when she lost her stern. If you have any ideas for ships I can cover in the future, put them down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. Until next time, my friends, have a great week.